So welcome back. We now are working with our final observations on Wordsworth, and more particularly Tintern Abbey. You ought to be with me in your hymnals on page 784, 785, 786. Now, last Friday, I spent and I think Mr. Judice will remember this, I spent the majority of our lecture time talking about an important Greek philosopher. What was him's name? Socrates. He had a student named what? Plato. Plato wrote a famous dialogue called Republic, where in that dialogue he introduces us to a concept called, I'm just going back reviewing for those of you who are here, the theory of what? The forms. Yes. And you will maybe recall that we said that this theory of the forms postulates a two-world view. Sometimes what we will call, Mr. Nelson, dualism. That is to say, two-world view. On the one hand, you have what he called images. On the other hand, you got what he called forms. We today call them concepts or ideas. Do you remember this? So, for example, we can talk about a beautiful body, right? But we said about that beautiful body, breaking Mr. Lang's heart, of course, that in the end, all bodies sag and bag, and that is to say they get old and they die. However, this concept of beauty has a tendency to perpetuate or to remain. We had several other observations. We pointed out, for example, that you can talk about Ruthie's tree out in my courtyard as something you can see, taste, touch. We won't go any further. This first box, ever related to the five senses, right? But then there's this thing that we will call nature with a capital N. Or we might even qualify it as simply energy, correct? Show me energy. I want to touch energy. No, you don't understand. That's just not the way that it works. In this, in the second box, we put issues like truth and freedom and value and all that kind of stuff. Again, these are concepts or ideas that you cannot touch. We pointed out, for example, that the number 2 is a symbol representing this thing called values or number. You can't really touch the number 2, and on and on and on it went, okay? Now, with that in mind, what we are going to do now is turn to Tintern Abbey and point out something. Tintern Abbey, and I'll just use TA as my 2 letters to recognize this. Tintern Abbey obviously belongs in the first box. You can see, taste, touch it. We showed videos or pictures of it for those of you not here last Friday. We showed some images of this beautiful place in South England. But then there's this question of what it means. Okay, what it comes to, can we say it this way, represent. For your notes, Tintern Abbey and the surrounding area will represent for Wordsworth very important kinds of concepts that we will call romantic concepts. That's why this poem becomes so important. In many ways, this poem is going to be the hallmark poem of Romanticism. Now, lest we kind of not really completely understand this as the game Wordsworth is playing, we already took you to these lines on 786 at the top of the page there. These beauteous forms. He actually uses the very word that we are referencing when we talk Plato. So another way to say this, I suppose, for your notes, Mr. Nelson, is the following. Tintern Abbey is a philosophic poem. I'll say it again. Tintern Abbey is a philosophic poem. By that we mean the following. Wordsworth is playing this game. He takes this philosophic concept from Plato and he applies it in poetry. Okay? Now we're going to work, Mr. Lang, specifically with these lines starting on 786. Now I'm going to work rather quickly because I have a lot of territory to cover before the exam of tomorrow. Notice what he says. These beauteous forms. What beauteous forms? The first some 23 lines describe what? In detail. Describe all that stuff that he's been looking at. Beautiful church, beautiful meadows, grass, green trees, all that stuff, right? Okay. These beauteous forms through a long absence. Why a long absence? How long has he been gone from this spot? 5 years. Through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. Put it in your own words. By the way, just to return, I'm teaching you how to read here. How do you read? You look at passages in your biology text next year as college students. You look at passages in your history text or your psychology text or in your tech manuals if you're going to tech school. You have to be able to put it into your own words. I remember once a student saying to me, I really don't need this reading crap because I'm going into the military. And of course I laughed and I said, you call me back at the end of your experience in boot camp. You tell me how much reading you had to do. And of course he reported, yeah, I was pretty stunned because anything in the modern military, of course, is technology driven, and to be able to run it well, you've got to have some instruction. A lot of that's reading. Much of it, of course, he had to do late into the night to memorize, or he was doing extra push-ups. And then it occurred to him, anytime we're reading actively, read it and then try and put it in your own words. What is it he's just said? I'll go back to it. These beauteous forms through a long absence have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. Put it in your own words. What has he just said? And again, when you start this process, it does seem very difficult. Nay, I say it impossible. But by May, the object is that you can read lines like this and you can say, oh, I kind of get it. He's saying that even though I haven't been here physically to see it with my eyes, I could still see it in my mind. Yes, I can go there in my mind. In your mind? Well, now, see, we could come back up here if we wanted to. Here I could, in this box, write the word brain. If we wanted to, see, we could cut open Harder's head. No, we won't do this. And we could actually see, touch, taste. We won't go any further. His brain. See, he carries that inside of his cranium. But is Harder's brain the same thing as his mind? Well, see, that's an interesting question. Because we assume you got to have a brain to have a mind. But if we were to cut open the cranium of Harder, we would see his brain. I'm sorry, guys, we wouldn't see his mind. You won't see his mind there. And yet, he has it, we assume. See? So we're kind of back to it. Wordsworth says, it's a strange thing about the mind. You can call up these images. Keep going. But oft in lonely rooms, some of you will say dorms. Some of you will remember these lines when you're sitting there all alone on your university or college campus in your dorm. By the way, some of the pals you graduated with last year, they're going through this right now. This is the famous week for it at the college level, where you start, the newness of it is starting to wear off, and you find yourself going, really? This was what I was so excited about, to get here to do this, sitting all alone in your room. Look what he says. But often lonely rooms amid the din of towns and cities. Din means sound, constant sound, right? Of towns and cities. I've owed to them these forms of the mind. I've owed to them in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration. Now, Mr. Lang, if somebody is restoring a car, what does that mean, the word restore? Fixing it up. Let's put it in our notes. Restoration. Bringing back to a former state, correct? So if you're, for example, restoring an old 57 Mustang, you are bringing that Mustang back to its original form, the way it used to look, right? Okay. Notice what he's just said about how you can restore your mind. Read it again. What did he just say? He said, when I look at these beautiful forms, my mind can be restored again, brought back to its former state. Let's put it in your notes now. This is a very romantic observation. The world is too much with us late and soon. Getting and spending we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We've given our hearts away. Being with nature, for Wordsworth, is a way to restore the mind. Now, some of you are like, dude, I already know that, which is why I hunt in the fall. It's an excuse to go out on the mountain and walk around for a day or two and to get lost in the woods. And there's this feeling that I kind of enjoy while I'm doing that. Okay, same concept. Keep going. Feelings too, line 30. Feelings too of unremembered pleasure, such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life. Are you ready for this? Wordsworth's going to tell you how you know when you've lived a good life. I have seniors. I got to tell you, I just had an email over the weekend of a student who said, dude, what was that line that you worked with once in class that defined what makes a good man's life? Are you looking at the lines? His little nameless, unremembered acts. of kindness and of love. Some of you will write that line down. It is an interesting line. Wordsworth says the following: if you really want to define whether you've lived a good life or not, this is the question. Look at the words again. The acts that you commit, they're not going to be big acts that make you important, that make your life important. Notice he calls them little. Secondly, he calls them unremembered acts. What do you mean by unremembered? What does that mean to you? These acts that you commit, they're so insignificant that other people have a tendency to not even remember them. To not even remember them. I had a senior once who said, I think I understand these lines because I'm now coaching volleyball, little girl volleyball. And of course, coaching little girl volleyball, it's kind of like herding a bunch of cats, you see. And she said, it's insane. And here I am trying to teach a bunch of 5- and 6-year-olds volleyball. And halfway through the experience last night, the thought occurred to me, these little girls, they got no idea how much time, energy this is taking for me. I could be doing homework, and right now I'm with a bunch of kids where I have to say over and over again, stand still and don't talk so I can explain this to you. And then it hit me, she said. When I was 5, 6, I was doing the exact same thing. And there was some high school kid up there coaching me. And I never once said thank you. Think about this. Over the weekend, did anyone in your life do any kind of little, unremembered act of kindness and love? It's the little tiny things that make us great, not the big things. How many times have you finished a meal you did not make and just push yourself back from the table and run away to whatever it is you had to get on with in your life? Oh, don't worry. There will come a moment when you will have spent a lot of time to make a meal for someone, or you will have spent a lot of energy to create something for someone, and they will simply go, yeah, and move on. Never even say, I need to tell you this, thank you. I've had seniors that say, wow, that is a powerfully sad observation. I've spent 18 years of my life enjoying little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love, and very, very rarely have I ever even said thank you once. Why? Because they're so insignificant. Oh, of course they made me a meal. What else are they supposed to do? From the time I was young, that was the first question when I came through the door. What are we having tonight? Why don't we have blah, blah, blah? What is wrong with you people? How come you... And then it never hit us to think. See, I realize this is painful for some of us. That's okay, don't worry. Wordsworth says you get paid back in a strange way. In the moments that you begin to do little nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love, and the people don't even recognize it as such. It's funny how that works. When we do a little nameless, unremembered act of kindness and of love, we want to be remembered for it. When somebody else does it for us, we have a tendency to immediately it doesn't even register on our radar. That's what parents are supposed to do, as one student once said to me. The student sitting next to her said, I don't have parents, and I'm telling you, yeah, I wish I had somebody in my life to do that for me. See how that works? Fascinating. Wordsworth challenges you today to commit one little, nameless, unremembered act of kindness or love. To find one person in your life, in your experience, to whom you can do an act that will be significantly great because it's a nothing act. See, we have this tendency to think we're great when we do big things, right? When we get political offices or whatever, right? When we do big stuff. Wordsworth says, no, it's completely the opposite. The really great life is the life that's lived by little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. Go back to what he's saying, though. He says, I'm reminded when I'm in nature that that's really what the true life of a great person is. Keep going. Such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life as little nameless unremembered acts of kindness and of love. Line 35. Nor less I trust to them I may have owned another gift of aspect more sublime. He says, hey, not only does nature Help me to recognize the powerful little nameless unremembered acts of kindness and of love that have been done for me and to me, but also I get to do for others. But he said there's another thing, that blessed mood. Are you familiar with people who get up in the morning and say, leave me alone, I'm in a bad mood? Now that use of that language, Wordsworth's interested in that. What does that mean, I'm in a bad mood? Wordsworth says, are you hearing what you're saying? If you say, I'm in a bad mood, you are saying without realizing it, I choose what mood I have. I choose that. I've had seniors that go, wow, I never thought about that. If you say, I'm in a bad mood, you could just as easily have said, I'm in a good mood. What determines your mood? Wordsworth will say, it has everything to do with a choice that you make. But Wordsworth says, I can make a choice to have a more sublime, powerfully good mood when I have been able to go back to this thing about nature. That's what he says. Keep going. Nor less I trust to them I may have owed an aspect more sublime, that blessed mood, in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. That serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on until the breath of this corporal frame and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended were laid to rest in asleep in body and become a living soul. While with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. Put this in your notes. Wordsworth will point out that the romantic intuition is that you can begin to see the world differently. You can begin to see into the very life of things. And the key here is harmony. To be able to try to see how everything fits together. Now, I'm on page 786. I want to point out, Wordsworth knows he could be wrong. He knows that there could be somebody who would sit there and kind of roll their eyes and say, what? You're saying that when you go into nature, you actually come back in a better mood, in a more happy mood. You kind of begin to see the harmony of things, and because of that, you're a more happy person, and you do those little nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. You're telling me all of that happens because you take a walk in the woods? Yeah, right. Wordsworth's aware that somebody might say that to him. So look at the paragraph break, the stanza break, and he says it out loud. Look what he says. If this be, this idea that he's postulating, that nature can somehow change a person, if this be but a vain belief, vain here means stupid. In other words, yeah, right. Yet, oh, how oft in darkness, and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir and profitable, and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O sylvan Wye. Wye is that river that we showed you on the video. What is it that he's just said? I'll put it to you in simple language. He says, I could be wrong about this thing about nature helping me, but I think I'm right. And more particularly, he says, even if it's a totally bogus concept, it's worked for me. It's worked for me. See, because here's an intriguing question. What kind of 40-year-old will you be? You're halfway there. You're halfway there, right? What kind of 40-year-old will you be? Think of it this way. When you are 40, kids your age will be looking at you. You're halfway to this moment. Kids your age will look at you when you are 40. And the question will be, when they look at you, will they say what you say about most 40-year-olds? Oh, God, I hope I don't end up like that. Or will they look at you and say, yeah, that's what I hope I'm like at 40? Are you ready for this? Wordsworth says, you will know what you're like at 40 by knowing what you're like at 18. You want to know what kind of 40-year-old you're going to be? Study yourself right now. If you're the kind of person that wakes up in the morning and goes, oh, God, not another friggin' day. You're going to be that person at 40. That will be you at 40, right? And, of course, an 18-year-old will look at you and go, oh, geez, I hope I don't end up like that. See, there's some kind of strange idea that you can kind of have crummy moods all the time until somehow you get out of high school. And then all of a sudden you get into good moods all the time because life is going to be so much more simple. See, the insanity of that view is just think about what you thought when you were a freshman. You actually thought life would be simpler as a senior. That's what you thought. Oh, it'd be so much funner. Because by then, at least as a senior, you get ready to graduate. Of course, we know that in 150 days, tick-tock, 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 we're getting ready to graduate, and we got to go do something. Freshmen don't got to worry about that. They know exactly where they're going to be in 12 months. They're going to be right back in this building, which is exactly what you thought a year ago to the day. Which is why your junior pals right now are not that worried about what happens in 12 months. Not like you. Not like you, right? But life just keeps getting like this. I mean, if you somehow think life's going to get more simple as you get older, well, you obviously know that's insane. I mean, all you got to do is think about the way you saw life when you were a freshman and how, well, let's talk about that, shall we? What was it like when we were freshmen? Well, we'll get to it. Take a look at how he continues now at 786. Notice, with each stanza break, Wordsworth makes a deeper and more profound and yet more practical observation. Take a look at what he says next. And now, notice he's been working in the past up to this point. Now he comes into the present. And now, with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity. I've had students that say, you know, when you start giving the lecture on this and you start saying things like, yeah, the future, it's kind of sad, and it's also perplexing. What's it going to be like in 12 months? Question, where will you be in 12 months? I can absolutely guarantee one thing, it ain't going to be here. It ain't going to be here. And even if it is, think about this. And even if it is, because you end up failing your senior year and you got to come back and take a class over again, are you ready for this? It still will not be back here. It still won't be back here. Oh, physically it'll be in 303. But you won't be the same you in 12 months. That's just the way it is. That's just the way who will you be in 12 months and where will you? See, that's kind of perplexing. It's kind of scary, kind of sad. The picture of the mind revives again while here I stand, not only with a sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years. Wordsworth says, all I need is one or two good moments in my life, and I can live off of those for a really long time. All I need are one or two good positive experiences in my life. And he says, I can live off of those for a long time. I don't need a lot of great experiences. I just need a few. Jot down at 3B. Do you have a single experience you can go back to when life for you starts to get really crummy and you start to think, maybe this is all kind of like useless? Do you have a moment in your life? It might be a location. You might have been alone. You might have been with someone else. Do you have a moment, an experience in your life that right now you can actually shut your eyes, or don't even have to shut your eyes, and you can go back to, and you can immediately re-experience that moment, and you can talk about it from a really positive perspective? It's exciting. It gave you good energy. It's a way to think about it. Do you have one of those moments? And Wordsworth would say, if you don't have one of those moments, then create one in the next few weeks. Make it. That way, as he says, you have food for future years. You have something you can hold on to that can get you through the crap that's coming that's called your life, which, by the way, is everyone's life. Everyone gets to have crap, right? It's the way it is. It's what earlier he called the heavy burden of life, right? It's kind of like it's pushing down on your shoulders. That's the word picture he uses, right? It's kind of, and he says, sometimes it gets so heavy, and I'm not altogether sure how to kind of get through it. He says, moments like this help me get through it. And so, look what he says. I love this line. I've had seniors that actually write this line down and stick it in their locker. It means something to them after they understand this line. And so I dare to hope. Oh. Now remember when you were kids, doing something, about to do something really stupid, and somebody said, I dare you, I double dog dare you, I triple dog, remember that? I dare you thing? Look how he uses this line. I dare to hope. Are you hearing what he's saying? Powerful romantic observation. You need to write this down. You choose to hope or not to hope. You choose to be happy or not happy. You choose that. It's not that that's somehow natural. You actually choose that. He says, I dare to hope. I'm going to go ahead and hope. But notice what he says. Read with me. I'm on 787. And so I dare to hope. Line 65 and so. Though changed no doubt from what I was when first I came among these hills, When I, like a roe, bounded o'er the mountains by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, wherever nature led. More like a man flying from something that he dreads than when he sought the thing he loved. Now, these are lines that often are difficult to students until you kind of get an understanding of what's going on. Do you remember as a kid, they told you, we're going to the mountains, get in the car. And into the car you got driving. Are we there yet? No. Are we there yet? No. Driving. Are we there yet? No. Finally, sometimes hours later, we're there. And the vehicle stopped. And the adults in the vehicle, how do they get out of the vehicle versus you, the kid, gets out of the vehicle? Notice the adults. They get out nice and slow. Oh, smell the... Oh, isn't this beautiful? Trying to point out everything, right? Well, how do the kids get out of the vehicle? Right? Run, right? And there the adults are. Oh, look at how beautiful, right? Right? So it reminds me of this pal of mine who got a job lecturing up in Alaska. And he was the coach of the cross-country team. And to run up there, in their contest, they had to get on a boat and they had to sail across some water to get to the other side. This is how it is in Alaska, right? So anyway, he's on the boat. Well, he had never been on one of these boats before, and so for him it was like awesome. All of his students grew up there. So all of his students go and they sit down on the deck chairs, put in their phones, right, and kind of lay back and start chilling or whatever. About that time, he's just totally into this, right? About that time, some huge chunks of ice and start falling off the sides. He had seen this in video, never seen it in real life. He's like, whoa, 100-foot falling in the water is so cool. He's turning around, the kids are all just like... Then all of a sudden, whales start coming out the water. These huge whales, right? All around the boat, there's these whales. He's just ecstatic. He's like jumping up and down. He goes over to one of his athletes and he's changing like, hey, you gotta come. And the kid does like this and opens her eye and says, what? Whales are breaching again, right? And yet every day you walk right out the front of this door and you can look up and see for free what people in New York pay money to drive out here to look at. They pull their Winnebagos over to the side of the road to take pictures of it. You've seen them. And you laugh about it as you see them. What are you taking pictures of an antelope for? Dude, what is wrong? Right? When you're a child, when you're young, you have no sense of what you are living around. Notice what he says. When I was young, he says, I'm changed from what I was when I was young. When I was young, he said, I was like a young deer that just ran through the woods. I had no sense of what it was I was around and in. It didn't matter. I was a kid back then. Are you ready for this? This is an important moment in this poem. Wordsworth admits he's an old fart. He ain't young anymore. He's old. Now, while seniors are not old, they are to 7th graders. And if you don't believe me how old you're getting, go back and look at your 3rd grade picture. Right? Right? And the minute that you do that, you kind of have to accept the fact that someday they're going to look at that picture you spent so much time creating for the annual this year. Somebody's going to look at that picture and go, dude, what was up with your... And then they're going to say something about either your hair or your clothes or the way you look. The same way you do when you look at your parents' annual and go, are you serious? Right? And it'll be in that moment that you're having this kind of Wordsworth observation. Take a look at what he says. He says, those... For nature then, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days and their glad animal movements, all gone by, to me was all in all. Look what he says at line 75. It's an interesting line. I cannot paint what then I was. If I were to ask Mr. Brown, what were you like as a freshman, and be specific? It's funny because at first he would think, dude, it was only 3 years ago. I know I can do that. But the longer he starts to think about it, he would find himself having to do silly things like going back and looking at an annual and finding a freshman picture of himself and saying, well, yeah, that was kind of me. But it's funny how quickly we forget our past. Isn't that true? Can I say this out loud? The adults you hate the most are the ones who forgot what it's like to be a kid. But you yourself have already forgotten what it was like to be in 5th grade. And you aren't that far removed from it. Here in 20 more years, you won't remember most of your youth. And that's what he says. I can't even remember what he says anymore. Look what he says. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, the deep and gloomy wood, their colors and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling and a love that had no need of a remote or charm by thought supplied, nor any interest borrowed from the eye. He says, when I was young, those adults kept trying to tell me, oh, look at this, how beautiful. I was a kid. I didn't need to be told it was beautiful. I just went out and ran in it. I had fun. It's interesting, ball players, when they're seniors and athletes, start going through this experience of lasts. This will be the last, blah, blah, blah. This will be the last. If you're not a ball player, but you're a student in this building, you'll start to have that. You do realize, see, your last August in school is now done. You will never do that again. You will never, ever again start school in August, because your university experience starts in September. And even though you do start at the end of August, 1st of September, it's a totally different experience. It's called moving on. It's called you're getting older, right? Take a look at what he says next. That time is past. In other words, he's an old fart. Look what he says about freshmen. And all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Boy, oh boy, did he just kind of characterize freshmen. They're dizzy, right? They're just... Have you been around these kids? Have been in this building? It's like, so I heard a senior say this just the other day. Where do they get all this energy from? Dude, you need to just chill out a little bit. They just go, right? That's what you're like when you're young. As you start to get older, you stop doing so much of that. You have a tendency to be a little bit more kind of like aware. Keep reading. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Nor for this faint eye, nor mourn, nor murmur. He says, dude, I do not want to go back to when I was young. No. Why? Other gifts have followed. For such loss I would believe abundant recompense. He says, I got older and I lost certain things, but I gained some things. What is it that he's gained? Hey, can I give this advice to you? Mr. Lang, I was given this advice when I was young by an old fart. And this is the way they said it. They said, listen to what old people have to say. You don't have to agree, but just listen. Here it is. An old man will tell you what it is he's learned now that he's gotten old. Look at what he says. For I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth. It's painful to read that line for us as seniors and to realize how most of our high school career has been thoughtless. We were just kind of doing things. We really didn't think very much about what we were doing. We just did it. Now that we get to the end of it, we start going, oh, I guess I can't even remember most of what I did. Dude, you've been in this building for 3 years. Going on 4 years. What have you done? See, it's kind of thoughtless. He says, I'm not like that anymore. But notice he says, but hearing oftentimes the still sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts. What an interesting idea. There will come a moment in your life when you no longer are just interested in silliness. Your thoughts become elevated. What does that mean? Well, look at my whiteboard. You know exactly what it means. When you're young, you spend all your time in this box. That's all you think about. But there comes a moment when you begin to kind of have elevated thoughts. You begin to think more about the second box. As you age, this inevitably happens. You will think more about your future in the next 150 days than you have thought about for the last 18 years. That is absolutely true. Why? Because it's here, and the choo-choo train's about to leave the station. Sorry, that's just the way it is, right? That is the way it is. I remember giving this lecture, and a student said, he was one of our celebrated athletes, and he said, you know, if I could go back and do my high school career all over again, I would. He goes, dude, I'd do it in a heartbeat. I'd go back to my freshman year like this, in a heartbeat. I'd do it all over again. And the girl sitting next to him said, that may be the saddest and most pathetic thing I've ever heard anyone say. She goes, I don't think I've ever heard anything more pathetic and sad than that. What are you saying? You're saying